I cannot wait to show you my interview, which is soon to come up right now, with Cassidy Lichtman, who is director of volleyball at Athletes Unlimited. She was a standout at Stanford, played overseas, and she's going to join me here on the On to Something podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley, a volleyball broadcaster. I've called games for ESPN. And on this conversation platform, a lot of you are familiar with this place. We bring on folks in sports and in sports media, not to get into the what they do, but more so to understand what they're all about, what drives them, what's underneath them in what they are going for in this life, their purpose, their sense of self, all of these things. It's an empathetic look at the person. And I think we were able to achieve that in this conversation with Cassidy. She gets asked to do a lot of interviews. This one was different, and I think in a good way. Without further ado, before we get started, if you feel so compelled, don't forget to subscribe. Here is my chat now with Cassidy. Well, I grew up reading newspaper clippings of her rising the ranks in volleyball. San Diego Union Tribune, we're both from San Diego, and Cassidy Lichtman joins me, professional volleyball player, went to Stanford, is now director of volleyball, Athletes Unlimited. She does so many different things. She's also a recent TEDx talker, and that had to have been a really fun thing to do, and I would assume more of that is coming. I'm Bryan Fenley. I've done some broadcasting for ESPN with volleyball, and Cassidy, I'm excited to highlight your story, learn about you underneath the surface and all the things you're doing. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks, Bryan. I'm excited to be here.
So to start here in what you're able to do from the Athletes Unlimited perspective and beyond, what I've noticed about you, Cassidy, is that you're making a difference. And I think at the core of what you are all about, that is what you are focused on. To steal a volleyball term, what is it about your life? What does it look like when it's in system? When your life is in system, what does that look like for Cassidy?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think as you pointed out, like it is really important to me to have some kind of impact. And so I think that's, been a common thread and been something that I key in on. And then I want to be challenged in that. If it's something that anybody could do, then I might not be as interested in it. If it's something that poses, a more complex issue or problem that doesn't have a clear solution, then I'm interested in trying to figure out, how do we think through that? How can we get to that impact when it's not, the easiest next step? So I think that's what's, at least, in my kind of post player career, has been driving me, of how do we address these kind of more complex challenges in interesting ways.
How do you feel like the way in which you attack challenges, those challenges, have evolved ever since you were in college and then you were a professional overseas, and now what you're doing currently with Athletes Unlimited?
I think as an athlete, at Stanford, on the national team overseas, it was more about, how do I improve in my game? How can I become the best volleyball player I can be? And then the teams I was on, how do we become the best team? And so I think where I'm at now, it's not that it's, completely different. It's just the scope has changed. Before I was kind of focused on, all right, at Stanford, how does this group of 14 players, become the best team it can be by the end of the season? And within that, there's a lot around, team dynamics and, skills around confidence and things like that. But it's really built around that kind of core group and the staff that you're working with. And so as I've kind of transitioned out of being a full-time athlete, I feel like I've really turned towards more of, systemic challenges kind of in the world. And honestly, a lot of those are similar. It's still team dynamics and a lot of kind of interpersonal issues. But how do we kind of attack those systemic challenges in different ways, as opposed to, just the group of people that I'm with kind of internally?
What is the best version of Cassidy Lichtman? What does that look like right now?
I think, like I said, kind of when I'm really being pushed or challenged, like one of the reasons I took the job with Athletes Unlimited, I was playing for them professionally for 2 seasons. And part of the reason that I started doing that was because I felt like there was actually a possibility that professional volleyball could exist in the US, which really hasn't been a possibility in my lifetime. And so I wanted to help build that So I signed on with them because of that, but I didn't really have plans to work in volleyball full time. Like I had no plans to, go become the CEO of USA Volleyball or start a league or anything like that. But as I was looking at it, I thought, we don't know exactly how this is going to work yet because nobody's done it successfully. So that's an interesting challenge, for me, is just think through, okay, strategically, what do we have to do to get to a place where this is sustainable and real? And I think the other part of it was like we said before, like sort of the impact side of it. I was looking at it as, yeah, like I love volleyball. I want the sport to grow. I think it's a good enough sport to attract an audience and be sustainable and get revenue and all of that. But also it's the biggest girls sport in the country and there's no professional league. And that just the kind of injustice of that, if we had the numbers that we had at the youth level, college level, and we were boys, we would have had a pro league, decades and decades ago. And so I think it's the marriage of those two things of, this is a problem that's never been solved and I want to help solve it. And I think I'm doing good by doing it. And then being surrounded by the people who are going to kind of push me and make me better. That was one of the other reasons I took this job too, was because I just genuinely really believe in the leadership of Athletes Unlimited. Our founders, John Patricoff and Jonathan Soros, and they're just brilliant people who are also really good humans. And I felt like those are the kind of people I want to be around to help myself grow too.
As you continue to grow and as you continue to do incredible work with Athletes Unlimited, for you, what are you trying to achieve in this life, Cassidy? There's so much that you've already done and are doing. You are on a mission. You've got this incredible purpose. You're changing the world and what your team is doing at Athletes Unlimited. But what are you out to achieve?
I think the sort of motto that I live by is leave it better than you found it. And so whatever organization I'm part of, when I was at Stanford, when I was in the national team, being a part of Athletes Unlimited, I want to leave that organization or that program better than I found it, but also the world. I want to leave the world better than I found it. And I think that, we're each given kind of skills and, different types of intelligences, and to figure out, okay, how do I use my gifts and my position to best kind of lead to that impact. I think that's what I'm here for. And to think through those kind of complex problems while doing it is what excites me, and to push myself in multiple different directions. And so I think that's what Athletes Unlimited right now is giving me.
When did you first realize, Cassidy, that gift of problem solving at an early age and being able to take on scenarios and look for solutions and beyond and before Athletes Unlimited? I got a feeling that your brain was working like this well beyond that.
I think I've always been fairly reflective. If you ask anybody kind of what my personality is like, I'm a very sort of calm, kind of level person. And I was always like that, even as a kid. And so I think, I didn't talk a lot when I was really young. I was quiet, but I was always kind of listening and observing and reading and that kind of thing. And so I think having that type of personality where I go, okay, let me look at what this is, reflect on it, and then figure out the best way to do it, I think was a natural thing for me growing up. And then honestly, being put in situations like in sports where whether it's the team off of the court or the game on the court, I think that helps build those skills too. To be, especially in a fast-paced game like volleyball, you have to make adjustments every point as you go. And so having to think through all of that, I think has definitely kind of helped develop it. But it's really just about, to me, kind of taking the time to reflect on an issue, and not having the sort of reactive response of like, I need to, as soon as something happens, I need to fix it in this way, and then you end up down the wrong path.
My guest today is Cassidy Lichtman. I'm Bryan Fenley. There's the reflection on all that you're doing, but what about the time sitting in reflection and looking at yourself and how you've grown and how you've changed and how proud you might be of the way in which you've been able to navigate this life? Where do you find those moments popping up for you?
I think one of the gifts that I have is I very rarely take things for granted. It's so easy, especially as a young athlete, to look at the next thing, to be like, oh, I want to go play in college. I want to go to the national team, because you're always dreaming of the next the next thing or the next trophy you can win. And I always had that. I always, had those kind of dreams and goals, but always really genuinely appreciated where I was. Like I loved high school and I loved college, and I loved being on the national team. And so appreciating those moments, even when they weren't easy, I think I've always had that. And so I feel like I'm pretty good at sort of reflecting on, at least kind of the gratitude of being in this place and being able to do this thing with these people. And then, yeah, I mean, I think I've had some kind of mentors along the way, or people that have taught me about the importance of, knowing yourself. And we had a great psychologist on the national team, Michael Gervais. He still works with Seattle Seahawks, and many others. And we learned a lot from him about just kind of mindset and the fact that, understanding who you are is vital to life, and also, your sport or your career. So I think I do take the time to look at it and go, okay, how do I feel in this moment? Where have I come from, and where am I trying to go to?
How far along are you into really discovering, and it's an ongoing life thing, a saga, but to discovering who you really are?
I think surprisingly, I feel kind of like I've always known. Like I was never the kid who was like trying to fit in with other people or worrying about what other people thought. Like I think where I live is the space where like I care really deeply how other people feel, and I care very little about what they think, in terms of how it's going to affect kind of me and how I live my life. And so I think I know in a lot of ways. Like I think I'm able to kind of be quiet and get to that point of like, I know when something doesn't feel right or when something does, and I can act in alignment with that, which is an incredible gift, because I think there's so much anxiety in the world, and kind of fear of disappointing other people. And so to be able to just say, like, this feels right to me and I'm going to do it because it seems like the next right thing to do, is a great thing.
What feels right to you as well, and you touched upon this, is your empathy. And that's a really important part of what you stand for. How have you noticed, looking through the lens of being empathetic, how that's helped people, you yourself?
I think in the context of my life, I've been on teams for pretty much my entire life, since T-ball, when I was 3 or 4 years old. And so that's where I go first, is kind of being a teammate. And so I think I've been able to kind of feel what other people need, and how they are best, how to best talk to them, or what they need when they're struggling, which is what great teammates do. And so I think it's a great way to grow empathy in terms of being on teams in sports or other capacities. But yeah, I think I've just been able to help my teammates, and again, not being worried about what other people are thinking about me, kind of alleviates that burden. And then I can worry about, or concern myself with, how do I help the person next to me?
That power of your voice, which is something you talked about in your TEDx talk, and it's something that's very important to the fabric of who you are. You have been able to give a voice for so many, in you being on the front lines of so many different important things that are going on in the world. But when are you able to, when you're going through your own hardships, to be there for yourself? In the sense of what I'm saying here, Cassidy, is the voice that you share with others, the one that's empowering, the one that's empathetic. How has that come in you yourself and helped you in times when you needed to pick me up, when you needed somebody to say, hey, you got this, it's all going to work out okay?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think in some ways I'm really good at it, and in other ways I'm not. I'm not good at asking other people for help. If I'm struggling, like I've tried to address that. Like I've gotten a little bit better, but I am pretty good, I think, at in my own mind. Like I think my self-talk is pretty solid, and that doesn't mean I'm never kind of critical of myself, but it's more like, I know that I can do this better, and so how do we figure out how? But I think I give myself grace, and like I said, I kind of act in alignment with who I am, and what I feel is right. And so there's not a lot of times when I'm kind of down on myself. And then when I genuinely believe that I can kind of do anything, and not in a way of like, I am the best and I can do all things, but in a way of like, whatever happens, I have what I need inside of me. And I'm going to continue to tell myself that even when I'm, in a moment that seems darker.
When you're able to think that way, what do you think if more could think that way? And I know that part of what you're doing, Cassidy, is opening the door to that. But what does that unlock for people? What can that unlock? The idea of there's so much out there that you can do, and that maybe you don't think you can, but actually you can. Being able to share that mindset that you hold so close to you and being able to spread that to others, what can that unlock with other people?
It's huge. I think it unlocks everything, like a whole kind of world of possibilities. And so, I think when I first sort of was able to articulate it for myself was probably when I was in college. Like I always had kind of a level of confidence of, let's just kind of figure it out as we go. But I grew up like with a pretty severe chronic pain condition. I couldn't walk when I was a kid. So me just like being able to play volleyball was already kind of beyond what was thought to be possible. And then in college, I went through a period of like, okay, how far can I push this? Like, I'm not sure where the limit is. And I decided like I'm going to push it as far as I can until I physically cannot, or like there's something that stops me. And what I learned is that the limits are always farther than you think they are. So you might as well kind of go chase them, because you're either going to get to it and you find it and you're like, okay, I can't go any farther, or you're not and you just keep going. And so I think one of the things that really helps me is to think sometimes like, what's the worst thing that could happen? If I try this and I fail, like, am I going to be homeless? Like, am I going to, like most of the time it's just like, yeah, you're going to fail and maybe you'll be embarrassed or whatever. Um, but if the worst thing that can happen is something that I'm okay with, then let's just go for it. Because the only way you're going to know is if you do go for it. And so that's kind of how I've approached it, is just, let's assume I can do it until something proves to me that I can't.
Which goes to the whole idea of athletes unlimited. You're
Yeah.
talking about, which is so cool, as we have a kind of a things coming full circle here in this conversation. Cassidy Lichtman is with me, of course, director of volleyball, Athletes Unlimited. I'm Bryan Fenley. Where do you feel in your own volleyball career that you differentiated yourself from your mom? And obviously, you've talked a lot about this from different interviews and conversations. She was a volleyball coach, was very much embedded in the game. But where did you gain independence from her in the way you looked at the sport, the way you wanted to take it, in your line of thinking?
Yeah. I think one thing that was really helpful, and different parents treat it differently. My mom never coached me on a team. So I think that probably helped from the start to give me kind of my own experience in the game. When my brother and I were little kids, she taught us how to play and gave us a ball, etc. But was never actually my coach. And so I think that helped. But there was definitely a shift between, in the kind of greater volleyball world. She knows all kinds of people in volleyball. And so there was definitely a shift at some point from me being her, like me being Julie's daughter, to having my own identity, and sometimes even her being my mom. And so that probably happened when I started when I was in high school, when I started kind of getting pretty good. But I think, yeah, my game was influenced by her, and watching her play and going to play with her and the other women her age. I have kind of an old school game in a lot of ways, and that's probably part of why. And it helped me a lot. But I think I definitely developed kind of my own identity as I got into high school and really started to understand the game and my skills within it.
When you're during those high school years and you're finding yourself, your obvious talent is really starting to get to that next level, what's powering you in those early stages, in that you didn't just want to be a great volleyball player, you wanted to be one of the best, and you were one of the best. There is the obvious talent there, but what were you out to prove in those early years of your life?
I think it's two things. One, yeah, there was some talent, but there were also a lot of reasons why I shouldn't have been that successful. You know, I'm 6 feet tall, which is tall for a normal person, but not that tall for kind of the next level volleyball player. And so there was always this question of kind of what position I was going to play and whether I'd be big enough at the next level. And I was always seen as sort of good, but you know, there's a little bit of a level above that. So I think I always kind of understood that, you know, even in high school, I was a big fish in a small pond, and there were people out there who were better than me. And so I think that was part of it, just knowing that, you know, that I wasn't that great, no matter what people around me were telling me. But I also just really loved the game, and still do. But at the time, it was just a matter of like, I want to experience this game at the highest possible level I can, and I want to keep getting better just because I love this, and I want to be great at it because I want to play the game as well as I can. So that was really the motivator of how good can I be at this thing, because it's so fun, and I want to see what it's like when you get to, you know, college and the national team and the top levels of the sport. Like, what does that feel like?
When you're getting to those levels, and you are there now, but even going back to your college days, you talked earlier, Cassidy, about the problem solving and the way you like to take on challenges. And the more complex the issue, the more fun it seems that you have. When you're out there on the court playing in the NCAA tournament in some of these tremendously big games, what is your mentality? And for me, it doesn't seem like there's any scant evidence of nerves, just understanding the way in which you sort of conduct yourself.
Yeah, I think I just always had this understanding of like, it's volleyball. Like, no matter what level it's at, no matter how many cameras are on, I know this game better than I know anything else. And so when I step out onto the court, the ball is going to come to me and I know what to do. So I think that's part of it. And it's sort of chicken or the egg. Like, I was a very consistent player, and maybe that's because I wasn't freaking out. But it goes a little bit hand in hand. Like, I had faith that on any given day I was going to step out there and I was going to do my job, and play the game the way that I knew how. And I don't know where that comes from. Again, I'm a fairly kind of level person regardless. I also, you know, when I was younger, went out onto the court with older players a lot. And so there were kind of those moments that probably prepared me a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I remember going to the national team and going out there and being like, yeah, we're playing Brazil, but like, it's volleyball and I know how to play volleyball.
Why is volleyball fun with Athletes Unlimited? More fun in different ways than anything you've ever experienced in your life?
Yeah, it's a super interesting format, right? So we instead of having different teams in different cities the way a traditional pro league does, we have all of our players within one city, and we redraft our teams each week. And so it's this interesting dynamic where you're playing against all of these players and you're competing at an individual level with all of them, because there's an individual leaderboard that's being kind of counted up at any moment. But we're also all teammates. And so I think that people go kind of two different ways. Some people think, oh, well, there's no kind of teams and rivalries. It's not going to, you know, be as competitive, or it's not going to be as kind of team focused. And there's teams that I've been on at Athletes Unlimited that, you know, we've been together 3 days and we play our first match. And those teams, we are ride or die. Like, we are all about those teams in the same way that I was about Stanford, that I was about the national team. And on the other hand, like, you're friends with all these people. You're going to play against each other and be super, super competitive, and then go back to the same locker room and play with each other's kids. It's this incredible kind of family atmosphere. But there's just so much joy in it. And I think, you know, those two dynamics are part of it, that you do have all of these sort of teammates, and that play at a really high level. But you get to know each other so well. So, you know, there's a challenge going on, you're talking through the net and having a full conversation with someone. But yeah, it's like nothing else I've ever kind of experienced in volleyball. And again, like, it's a new challenge that and at this point in your career, you rarely get the opportunity to do something that's entirely new. You know, you go to a different country maybe, but you're playing the same type of season. You're playing the same teams over and over again in the same sort of way, dealing with the coaches. But Athletes Unlimited is just different because of that dynamic of knowing each other so well, switching teams all the time, not having a head coach really with the kind of authority. to make decisions. So it really is the players, figuring it out amongst themselves. And as we've discussed, I like kind of being able to figure things out. And so I think that the freedom to kind of play the way that you want is really interesting too.
Giving more power to the athletes. That's something that Athletes Unlimited is all about. What can other sports leagues learn about the way in which you guys run things?
Yeah, I think it's huge. I'm hoping it's the way that sports leagues are going. But Athletes Unlimited has been so intentional about embedding the athletes in every step of the decision making. And so, for my first 2 years, I was the chair of what we call the player executive committee. And there are 5 of us who are involved in every decision made about our league. And the same exists in our leagues and other sports, and basketball and softball and lacrosse. But we're kind of directly in communication with the leadership around all of it. And so we sign off on where we're going to play, and what we're going to wear when we play, and who our officials are going to be, kind of every single thing that's going to affect our athletes. And kind of beyond that, Athletes Unlimited gave a spot on the board of directors for an athlete. So I've been the first to fill that seat, which is revolutionary. There aren't any current athletes sitting on the boards of the NBA or the W or the NWSL. And so I think just having the voices in the room of the athletes who know better than anyone else how the league should be run. We're the ones who have been in these situations. But B, we've seen how the lack of power makes athletes unsafe in a lot of situations. So having kind of owners who really own these people, these athletes, has put people in situations that just really aren't good for them as human beings. And so I'm hoping that other leagues, as Athletes Unlimited grows, will look at that model and say, okay, how do we, whether it's the exact same thing, how do we take that approach and see how we can, bring the athlete voices into the decision-making processes within our organizations.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, the events are happening because of the athletes.
Yeah.
That's everything. You don't have anything without the athletes, and the idea of what you're doing is empowering them. What was it like when you got the notification that you were going to be a part of that board, the executive board? Where were you when you figured out that you were told, or that you found out that you were going to be part of something that really is history?
Yeah, I was on a call with John and Jonathan, John Patrick and Jonathan Soros. And they said, hey, we have a question for you. Would you want to do this? And I was like, I cannot think of a single reason why I wouldn't want to do that. Again, I was already kind of so invested in the league and how it was run, and just had a respect for the organization. And for those 2 guys, I think that they're just incredible. And so, but I think, yeah, walking into that boardroom, I think the first board meeting we have, and just going, wow, this is not a space I would have thought I was going to enter. At least not at this age, at this point in my career. Maybe, years down the line when I had lots more experiences, but for them to kind of open that room to us in general, to athletes in general, and then to not only to open it up, but, when I did walk in there, that they genuinely ask for my insight and my voice, and make me feel like it is valued at all times. And let me say, hey, I don't understand that, because I don't have, the experience and the training that some of our other board members do. So I think to be the people that they are, at the status that they are, and to make someone like me or someone like our athletes feel comfortable to say, I don't understand, or to voice an opinion, is, an incredible gift that they have.
What can you bring to them and you've got a lot of colleagues that are on the board that bring unique, important things, but what can you bring, or what have you already brought that nobody else can?
I think it's the athlete perspective, which again is just undervalued in a lot of spaces, but we are the product, and the league doesn't work, the organization doesn't work if the athletes aren't happy, or if they're not performing. And so I think that's, the biggest thing, and not only the athlete perspective from within this league, but from, other experiences throughout my life and career. And I think as athletes, we often even undervalue it in ourselves, and think, okay, well, I don't know if I can, enter this room because I don't have an MBA, and I don't know, certain things. But you go, okay, but I have, 20 plus years of experience playing this sport. And so I am more of an expert in that than any of these people will ever be. And I need to kind of value that perspective too.
Cassie, as we wrap up this conversation, I was listening to one of your videos on YouTube, and you were talking about how you're reliving the story of when you got to Stanford and you had a tutor, or not a tutor, but you had an academics advisor come to you, and there was this whole stereotype of you being an athlete, and obviously that was unsettling for anybody knowing what you're all about, and the idea that you got in those 4 years, not one but 2 degrees, and to see the way in which your voice is making changes and is continuing to grow and build. I just have to say it's inspirational to see that, Cassidy, from my perspective. And I hope and I think that as we conclude this conversation, that people further in their fandom of what Athletes Unlimited stands for, but also what you stand for beneath the surface. They see you on the front lines, they see you making conversation, they see you making speeches, but being able to go underneath that in this conversation, I think was really special. And I appreciate you so much for doing this. Cassidy Lichtman with Athletes Unlimited, Director of Volleyball. I'm Bryan Fenley, a volleyball broadcaster. Cassidy, thanks so much. This was a blast. Really enjoyed sort of peering into your mind and everything you stand for.
Thank you. This was a great conversation. I loved it.